Blasphemy.
Thank you. Are you saying I did? Or are you
Well, I'm
reminding me?
just, no, I'm
Cueing you.
yeah.
So and I'm gonna, it's in my notes, and I have something I can link into the next, if I didn't already in the first two, I can't remember now, I'll make it, I put a lot into the first mailing. If there's something that links to blasphemy in there, okay, that will flesh out more what I'm about to say. But in a nutshell, this has to do with the name of God. Okay, look, that's the real target of the laws of blasphemy. Even now, like in today, there are Islamic societies that have blasphemy laws, and it's all about the name of Muhammad. Okay, and some of them are capital crimes because you spoke against Muhammad. Okay. In the Old Testament, in the Torah, there's a law that says, to begin with, in the Ten Commandments itself, it says something about God's name, right? In the Ten Commandments, it says what about God's name?
Don't take it in vain.
Yeah.
Keep it holy.
It's holy, and do not take it in vain. Okay? And the religious practitioners of the Jewish and Israelite world took that very, 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 very seriously to begin with. Especially in light of the fact that now, as God was passing on this Torah to Moses and he's writing it out, you got something that says, when you do or say this about God, about his name, it will actually be a capital crime also. Yeah, it was a capital offense. Okay. And so when we fast forward from that time that Moses wrote it down for the Israelites to fast forwarding to this, right, 2,000 years ago, and now 2,000 years from now, is that we're going to really see, as we read through this account, that John is poking this button throughout the account about who Jesus is on purpose, okay? And how it got Jesus in trouble. How it got Jesus where he was in the end and put to death was the fact, quote unquote, that you got a human being that's calling himself God. And as far as the religious leaders, especially in their culture, that's a big no. I don't know why all you guys are listening to this guy. He's a false teacher. We're going to find every way to smear him we can. Right? And they were he was a threat to them. Okay? But the thing is, though, on the other hand, Jesus was involved in writing the blasphemy law in the Torah because he's God. He wrote his own death sentence. You ever thought about that? Probably not. That's the way my brain operates, okay? If Jesus is who John says he is, right? He created everything. Nothing that came into the world was created apart from him. He's the Word. He's the light. He's the life. Okay? Where did Moses didn't just come up with this, 618 or whatever it is, detailed codes for the Israelite nation. God gave them to him. So before that was even written, before the world was even created, right? God knew that this is how it was going to be. God already knew. There's already a plan. There's already a strategy. We're going to talk more about, as we go through the book of John too, how it's not just a purpose and a plan, but there's even strategized. And there's I don't want to say, there are little things that Jesus does to make sure on the regular that the religious leaders are knowing that he's claiming something. Yeah.
But Jesus did not violate the Ten Commandments. He was perfect. So how can
Yes.
you say that he knew that when he wrote this, that it was going to be his death sentence? Because if the religious leaders had been really honest about the law, then they would not have found anything
Well,
wrong.
number one, they weren't honest.
Right.
Number two, even if they were honest, okay, were they expecting the Messiah to be God himself?
No, they're expecting a human being.
Yes. So what do they have in front of them?
A human being.
A human being. And as far as they were concerned, as far as they could see, he was a human being. He was doing some crazy things, but usually they weren't, being witnessed by the entire nation. We're going to talk about that and about the signs too. They weren't being witnessed by the entire nation and all the religious leaders and the high priest. There were specific audiences. Some of them were small. And so, if all they see is a man, including the disciples, the 12 guys, John being one of them, are following along with him for 3.5 years, is there any indication even among them that they thought he was anything more than a man?
No.
Even though there was things that were pretty scary about him, right? And then they're getting to go, oh man, you've got, like Peter, you are the Messiah. And he also said though,
You're the Son of God.
finally, when it comes right down to it, and you got to say something out loud, like I said last week, you got to say something out loud when you're faced with the question, right? Well, who do you say I am? I had the same question asked me. Who do you say I am? Basically, Jesus was asking me, right?
Yeah,
I believe
Peter
that you're the
also
Son of
said,
God.
to whom else can we go?
I know.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
Are
yeah.
you going to leave me? Well, where else can we go?
Where else are we going to go? You know where they're going to go? Yeah, we're going to get to that. So there's only really this boiled down group, ultimately, that think that he's more than just maybe a human being. Everybody else sees a human being. And if you're a human being that is calling yourself God or implying that you're God, you just struck a nerve. I mean, you've taken a knife and just dug it into the religious leaders' nerves. Right there. Because that's, number one, that's not what the Messiah is. That's not what the Messiah is. That's the official line. It's not what the Messiah is. We all know what the Messiah came for. Even the disciples, when he's ascending into heaven, are going, is it now? Is it now? Is it? No. Are you guys not going to pay any attention? It's like, so anyway, is that helpful? Mm-hmm. Because if I was doing it, if Ray was doing it, if you were doing it, saying this kind of stuff, what would be happening is exactly what C.S. Lewis called it, right? It's a trilemma that people refer to, right? And he says, Jesus never gave the option of being called a good teacher. He didn't give people that option. He taught good things because he's God and he's the truth. But he didn't give them that option on how to identify him as a personality. He either was crazy because he claimed to be God, right? Or he was a liar,
liar, lunatic,
or a Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lord, liar, or lunatic. He wasn't a good teacher. Jesus, he forces this dilemma on his listeners and his observers. right? On purpose. But anyway, we're going to continue to develop that through the whole entire gospel, because we're going to see him doing and saying things that are just like, wow. Even to the disciples, when Thomas says, when they're trying to talk him out, they're trying to talk Jesus out of going to Bethany. Remember that? If he's sick, if he's asleep, then we don't need to go there. Just, no, he's dead. He's dead. And we're going to go there. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go where it's not safe, 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, where they already tried to stone him. They already tried to stone him. That's why they're not in Bethany anymore. Not in Jerusalem anymore for a while. They're taking a respite. So, okay, we're going. And they don't know how big it is. But I'm going. And what does Thomas say?
Go and die with him.
Let's go and die with him. Okay, well, you going? Where are you guys? Let's go and die with him. Because that's what happened in Jerusalem last time we were there. He was going to get stoned. I guess we'll just all get creamed, and that's it. That's an underrated passage. It really is. But we're getting ahead of ourselves anyway. The name of God is holy. Blasphemy is when you're treating it as if it's common. So we covered, it's Leslie Williams' MacBook on the prowl again. Sorry about that. We're going to get out of this and get back to her. That's Emery when she was
Smaller.
like 3, 2 or 3 with me. She is now the 13-year-old downstairs. 13?
She's 11.
She's 11. Yeah, her sister's 13. That's Mark, my son-in-law. His dad, her dad. Can't talk. Okay, we're on here. Get over here. Okay, I'm not going to blow up the screen with the interlinear this week, I promise, because I did find another source here that we can use for just reading the Bible on a nice big. What do you do? Can't see. I know what I'm trying to do, but I am. My eyes are just kind of messed up these days. Anyway, there we are, right there. Everybody can see that, right? Okay. In the beginning was the Word. Creation story. He writes a new creation story. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Or as we saw in the Greek, literally, where it says in Greek here and in here, it says the Word was with God. Boom, 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 boom. Just like the Greek. And here, the Greek is the opposite. But it's not as poetic sounding in English. The Greek says the Word was with God and God was the Word. Right? It makes a difference. It makes a little bit, you can translate it the other way around in English, but it makes a difference. It's harder to manipulate and it has a different meaning. He was with God in the beginning. Okay? There again, he's continuing the creation story. He is not a real great English translation of that Greek word. In fact, he, him, where's the other one? Him, okay. He, him, and him. In that text right there, in that paragraph, are not actually gendered words in Greek. They are best translated. Guess what's the same word that's being translated completely differently in this sentence? Okay? Now, think about this. Here's where I'm going. In him in this one, okay, is a better English translation. In this one, because you're talking about a human being, or a personality. At this point, you're talking about a personality at this point, right? Because we're talking about back during creation, right? So he's talking about a disembodied, human-bodied, is that a word? Personality that was in eternity. And so this one was with God in the beginning. Okay, that makes sense? It's not problematic if you think about the fact that God is not gendered. Right? It doesn't pose a problem. Men and women are composed humankind, and humankind is made in God's image. Okay? We are gendered. But God isn't either one. He isn't male or female, or he created male and female, right?
That
So-
word is singular as well, not plural.
This is a singular, okay. These are actually two different words, but basically when it comes down to it, it's better translated, and there's a reason why I'm going with this. It's better translated this one, because it's just referring to either an object or an animated whatever, right? He's not a human being yet. So through him, again, this one, all things were made. That's a huge thing. That's a huge statement, right? Does that sound like he's talking about God? According to what we know about Genesis?
Yes.
Does it already sound, because of what was previously said, that he's talking about God? Even though now he's going to be using the term, a different term than the Word. And it's not Jesus either yet. Through him all things, through that one, this one, all things were made. Without this one, nothing has been made that has been made. Up till now, we're referring to him as the Word, this personality, right? And he's God. In this one was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. So now we're calling him life. Now we're calling him light. Creation words. Creation story words in Genesis. Right? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome it. We talked about that a little bit last week, about the divide, the difference between light and darkness cannot overpower light. And how there is no darkness in God. There's no darkness in where God lives and he exists and everything. And in the future, in Revelation, John talks about there not being any darkness in the next world. Right? It's all light. Because God is the light. And they're identifying this personality as the light. You see that? Everybody okay with that? Okay. Now, he leaves that for just a second. Still haven't gotten to Jesus yet. He's still not talking about Jesus yet. He's talking about this personality that we're saying he's God. He's deity. He's already started by inching really right up there against literal blasphemy, right? Calling Jesus God. This is written that we may believe, right? He hasn't mentioned, like Yahweh, for instance, right? Hasn't really said that and said, oh, whoa. That's all coming. That's all coming. So, this is what's kind of interesting and kind of funny and a little awkward. He breaks from that. He breaks from the creation story and started up. There was a man. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and this one was blah, 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 and light, and life, and I said, there was a man. I mean, talk about the juxtaposition. A really radical, sudden, abrupt juxtaposition in this whole prologue, right? There was a man sent from God. He was sent from God. His name was John. He wasn't God. He was sent from God. He was born a human being by human beings, doing what human beings do to create other human beings. Right? Not like Jesus was, as we find out later. But here's a man. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light. Who's that light?
The word.
The Word, the life, the light. Later on in the context, we realize this is Jesus who he is referring to. Because John is a human being. John the Baptist. Not John the Apostle who's writing this. John the Baptist is who he's talking about. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He was not God. He himself was not light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world at the same time that John was alive, John the Baptist. He was in the world and through the world, and though the world was made through him, like, well, it's already been stated, though the world has been made through him, the world didn't recognize him when he came, Jesus. The world didn't recognize him. He came to that which was his own. See, now people that are reading this, are hearing it spoken, things are starting to come into focus a little bit now about who he is actually talking about, right? He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Okay, who's he talking about?
The Jewish people. The Jewish people.
The Jewish people. I mean, at large, yeah. Yeah. And that included who? His community, his family, his younger siblings. There was a problem, wasn't there? We see it in this gospel. We see it in this account. Man, the Galileans weren't that big on him as a body of people. And those that were really radically disagreed with each other. Because, they were like their own people up there in Galilee, right? And he grows up in a working class environment. And it's literally said in the texts, isn't he Joseph's son? Isn't he the carpenter's son? We've known him and his family for how long? And now he's saying all this about himself? And so what kind of craziness is this? Even his own brothers. He came into the world, his own did not even receive him.
Hey, Bruce,
Yeah.
I've often wondered, and there's not a lot written about Mary, his mother, but it's
I know,
really hard to
right.
think that
I
she
know.
would not believe. And yet there was that passage, I don't remember which one of the Gospels, where she's calling him, trying to get him away from doing what he had been doing, like your mother and your brothers. So that really bothers me a lot.
I think it bothers a lot of people.
She was part of the miracle. I mean,
Exactly, yeah. But also, just personally, it's not a very scholarly answer, but just personally, in my wrestling with that, is like, the part of the incarnation that she was directly connected to, right, and she was witness to, was limited. Like, the whole time he was growing up, the only little peep that we get when he's growing up is in another gospel where he's 12 years old and they can't find him because they've left him behind, and he's in the temple talking to his, hey, I'm about my father's business. And they're kind of going, what are you doing? Why are you putting us through this?
Yeah.
Right? Stressing us out. 3 days. Can you imagine? Anyway, and so when the ministry starts, Jesus is nothing like what the Jewish nation thought the Messiah was going to look like and sound like. And I believe that he wasn't talking about while he was coming of age and getting to that point about what he was going to do and how he was going to do it.
No, of course not.
He wasn't talking about it to anybody.
But she still knew that
And,
he was miraculously conceived and born, and
yeah, I know.
she was
Well, she's human.
there at the temple when
I know.
something happened.
It's
Well, I don't
hard.
know that she doubted in that particular account. Maybe she was concerned because he wasn't eating, you know?
Well, that's true.
You know,
That's
maybe
true.
as a mom, she's like, okay, you're like wearing yourself out with all this stuff and you're not taking care of your physical self.
Yeah,
And that may
me
have
too.
been what
Yeah.
her motivation was. I don't think it was a lack of faith.
Right.
I think, and building on
But
that.
when his response, Jesus' response is, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?"
Yeah, right.
And it sounded like she was not, he wasn't describing her, he was describing believers. So I don't know, I mean, anyway, maybe the
Well,
Gospels are
his
intentionally
was his
vague
answer
messages.
to his mom, or was it an answer really not an answer, it was a question, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what rabbis do, is they ask questions
Right.
more in response to questions, right? And so, it's a literal thing, even back in his day.
Yeah.
And so, he's talking to his little audience, asking them a question in response to somebody comes in, hey, your mom's outside, blah, blah, blah. Didn't mean he didn't care about his
All
mom.
right. All right, I'll take Mary off then.
Anyway, so, yet all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, stop, right there. To those who believe in his name, the gospel of blasphemy, right? Remember? Okay, name. The name of God is when you are attacking or making light or casualizing, sorry about the bad English, the name of God and not giving it proper reverence, that's blasphemy. And yet, John is saying, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Okay, just think on that a second. What's that saying about him, right?
He had all authority.
Yeah, he had all authority. And he had a name. That they're now pairing, right, with God. It's going to get paired with God, right? Children born not of natural descent, like John the Baptist, or us, for that matter, right? Nor of human decision or a husband's will. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But born of God. We're born spiritually. That's what he's talking about. We're born spiritually. He gave us the right to anybody who believes in his name to become children of God. That's a position statement, right? Isn't that kind of a position statement that John is making about Jesus? Now we're back to the Word. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Okay. This is where we're going to take a little time out for a commercial break, where we take a look at pictures. What's that?
The temple.
Close. Not the temple,
Tabernacle.
the tabernacle. That was established in the
Oh, that's
wilderness. Okay. Kind of a crude way of setting up tens of thousands, if not millions, of the tribes of Israel around the center. The tabernacle would occupy the center when they were encamped as a nation, and each tribe had its own order that they camped around, and it was at the center of their nation, right in the middle, from a topographical standpoint. If you're not familiar with it, God said, build this tent. Everybody's living in tents. The whole nation is in tents. You're going to build me a tent. It's going to be pretty fancy. It's going to be expensive as far as like materials are concerned. But it's going to be my tent. This is it. And it's divided into two different rooms. And there's the tribe's pattern that they camped out in, and the original numbers roughly of those different tribes, population-wise. The measurements, and then that tent that's inside of the court, you know, the holy place and the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant is. Okay, no jokes about Raiders of the Lost Ark. This was God's dwelling place. He moved into it. He moved into it. And his presence lived there. His glory lived there. This is important. This is very, very important to what John is saying in this text. Because if we just read it in English casually, we're not catching this. We're just not. It's because it's easy to say, that's cool. That's really, really cool. God became flesh, the Word became flesh, and He dwelled among us. Well, that's past tense, right? Because He's writing past tense in the first century about Jesus. But He's also writing past tense about something that happened a couple thousand years before that, right? Build me this place, and this is my tent. You're all going to be in tents. I'm going to be in a tent. That's where I live. But this, you don't get to come in here. You don't get to come in here. That's the Holy of Holies. That's my place. That's my tent. That's my dwelling place. Restricted zone, right there. And if you noticed, in the other picture, what's right directly above the Holy of Holies in that picture?
Smoke.
A cloud?
A cloud of smoke sits above the Holy of Holies, which is that end, sits above it all day long, every day. Every single day. And when it moves, they pack up and they move and follow it, and where he stops, they pitch the tents, put it back right underneath the cloud. Now we're moved. They didn't move unless the cloud moved. What was there at night?
Pillar of fire?
Yeah. All night long, every night. Can you imagine living this way? We don't even talk about this.
At least you knew He was there. I mean, because sometimes we feel like, where's God? You know,
Right,
hear us,
right.
He can hear us. But there, I mean, you could
We
actually.
never talk about this.
Wow.
And we even know it. We know this story. We don't talk about this. Can you imagine living 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for 40 years, experiencing that?
Well,
Okay?
Why do you,
Why is it pixelated?
no, why do you doubt that?
I know, right?
How do you see that every night and
Right.
still doubt?
Yeah, I know.
I don't know, maybe.
I know. See, and that's sobering.
Yeah.
That is so crazy sobering. And it happens all the way through the Bible. I mean, all these
Maybe they just got
amazing...
blasé about it or something. It's like, it's always there, so
Yeah,
take it for granted.
yeah. I mean, what do you need?
Yeah.
What have you got to have to humble yourself before it and give yourself to it and trust it? What do you got? What do you got to have? What do you need? What is it that you need, right?
But you know what? As I'm prone to say a lot these days, in fact, Barry can attest to this from our conversation this morning, that
There's not much that separates me from Adam. There's not much that separates me from Peter or Judas. We're human beings. There was a lot of human beings here, and some of them were humble. Some of them were humble, right? But as a nation, they had a problem being humble, right? They wanted to complain, and they wanted to grumble. Remember that word as we go through the Gospel of John. The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. Okay? So I'm not going to go to the interlinear right now. It's just too much work on screen there. But here's the bottom line, okay? This Greek word right here, that they're translating that into English, is the same word for tabernacle. To boil it down, to make it in simple terms, okay? It's borrowing from the word, the Greek word that's used in the Septuagint, Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, to refer to the tabernacle. And so what would really be, even though it's, if we're going to write it in English, it should say, and made His tabernacle among us, or that He tabernacled with us, because everybody was in tabernacles. It's a word for tent. He made His tabernacle among us. But who are we talking about now? Are we talking about the actual tabernacle back in the desert? The Israelites? We're talking about Jesus, right? This is Jesus.
That's a foretelling of Jesus.
This is
life,
Jesus, right? Jesus is the Word. He became flesh. Now He's Jesus.
right?
Meaning, He was God. He became flesh and made His tabernacle among us. Now, when you're hearing this as a Jewish person in the first century, what is that saying about Jesus?
Only if it's the representation that He's holy, He's the Holy One.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. He's pointing at His deity. There was only one person that lived in the tabernacle. Only one. And now He is putting an equals sign between Yahweh, who lived in the tabernacle in the Holy of Holies, and this Word that became flesh. He's putting an equal sign between them. You see that? It's critical. It really is critical to understand exactly really what He's driving at here, to recognize that. We're not translating that passage very well in modern English translations. Literally, it can be said that way because, God said, "This is my dwelling place is in the tabernacle." But man, when I just read it in English, He became flesh and made His dwelling among us, I go, oh, that is so cool. Right? And it is cool. He made His dwelling place among us. That's cool. Not as cool as it actually is saying it is. Laura.
I actually thought you were asking us if the word dwelt in the tabernacle back in the wilderness. Which I'm like, well, wouldn't the answer be yes? If the word was with God from the
If there's an
beginning,
equal sign
then he
going on
also
here.
dwelt in that tabernacle at the beginning.
Hello?
Mhm.
Hello? Yeah. Blasphemy? Right? Is it blasphemy? If you're a Jew reading this, and you're understanding what the Greek language is saying about your culture and your religion and your history, and they knew it. If you haven't already, in the handouts, if you don't already have a handout, grab one. If you ever look through their handouts and you saw that section that I put in there about how Jewish people were educated as they were growing up, be sure and read that. Because I don't know how you get a more educated people, even the working class,
But just the boys.
and just the boys, that's correct, yes. Leslie was sure to point that out to me too. It is correct, it is correct. But they all went to synagogue. They all went to synagogue every Saturday, every seventh day, and heard. That's all they did was hear the Hebrew scriptures read out loud. It's like there was a saturation nationally, right? That they knew the Torah. If there was anything that they knew, it was the Torah. The other stuff in the Hebrew scriptures, that was for the next levels of education. But bottom line is that you knew the Torah, which means that you knew the tabernacle. And you knew that history. You knew why they had the festival of tabernacles every single year that Jesus and his disciples go to in this account. Right? They knew. So that packs power. That packs power to the hearer and the reader, right? And so it should make a difference to us that the things that he was pounding and reminding people of and pointing at was important. There was intentionality, and there's a reason why he's making all these points. Because the Jewish nations and Jewish readers knew what all this meant, whether they were Christian or not. The Gentile Christians, all they had was the Hebrew scriptures up until the points that the Gospels are starting to be written, right? So that was what they referenced all the time too. They're learning about the history of Israel and the Torah. They're learning about that stuff, the converts. So they're aware of what he's pointing at. John testified concerning him. Who's him?
Jesus.
John
Became
testified
flesh.
concerning Jesus. Now, the Word that became flesh. He cried out saying, John, this is the one I spoke about when I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. This is him. This guy. Right here. Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. It's one of the best things written in the whole entire New Testament, if you ask me. It's one of the best things ever written in the history of man, I think. It's just like, what? Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given.
How would you, what, how do you describe his fullness? What is, help me wrap, his fullness.
Well,
Can you put
Mary,
I'm sorry.
don't be sorry,
I just want to
because
understand.
there's nobody in this room that really has that answer.
Okay,
To me, it feels like that's talking about grace in place of grace already given. It is
Yes.
literally out of his fullness.
Yes.
In other words,
Out of all the
not
demons.
only did you already have it available to you if you could follow the law, but you couldn't, but we knew you couldn't, you
Yeah.
know, but
Mhm.
in my wisdom and speaking, in his wisdom and speaking as him,
Yeah.
in wisdom of that, you already had a plan for grace. Grace was received, the Holy of Holies, the receiving of the sacrifice and that. But it wasn't perfect. So fullness was the completion of what the meaning of perfect is complete. Fullness
That's
was
good. That's
that's
good.
what I see it as.
So that's
His
good.
entirety, everything about it.
Everything about God is about grace. God is love. God is grace. God is truth, Mike.
One of the things that was happening at the end of the first century, there was a huge explosion of Greek philosophers that were kind of integrating however they could with the Christians. And the word that they used for the essence of God was fullness, pleroma. So when pleroma starts coming up in the writings of Paul and in John, they're saying, hey, this really is God. And Jesus is not an emanation from God, he's really God himself.
Thank you, Mike. Because I didn't have that in my notes or my studies to include in this, but that's really good. This is just another one of many examples, right, that are going on in these writings that are subverting the Jewish culture, subverting the Roman culture, subverting the Greek culture, and turning all of it on its head at every turn, right?
Can I read Colossians
Yeah. In
1,
fact, please do. I think that's
15
actually in our.
through,
Yep.
at least through 19? So it says, it's saying some similar things. It
That's
says,
right.
He is the image of the invisible God,
Yep.
the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that everything might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile himself to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven. So the fullness is just every aspect of God. It dwells in Jesus.
Yeah, it's the completion of it. Yeah, in easiest terms and way oversimplified terms on that fullness thing, it would be, he had a plan B. He knew plan B was, he knew man was gonna fail with plan A. He knew he had a plan B ready to go, and not only ready to go, but in action already.
Okay,
Stage 2.
Too simple.
actually, I'm gonna push back at that. Here's why. All of it was plan
I agree.
Yeah,
All of it
that's
was
true.
true.
Plan B is
A. I know what you're
misleading in a
saying,
sense.
getting at, but.
Yeah, no, but I mean, he had an answer already
Yes.
is a better word, right? Plan B makes it sound like, oh, things
Yeah.
changed. No, he knew it was happening.
Yeah.
It was just a foreshadowing.
Yes.
But that in itself goes again, yeah, fullness. That again, it's already covered before it happened.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. Now, thanks for pointing us at that, because it's actually something that shows up a lot in this study that we're tackling, right? This
Yeah.
talking over the
Same.
Gospels.
Well,
Is
when
that-
what you carried, sorry, Bruce.
No, go ahead.
What you carried in, and you said even before Mike brought it up, is I'm losing my thought. You brought in the Greek influence,
Right.
the Gentiles' influence on the population. Now
Yeah.
we're not talking about something with internet where people can go, an information age where you can just go get information.
Yeah.
You brought it up in the smallness of some of the witnessing of the things that were happening and all that. We're talking about, did you hear what happened over around the corner? And then how does that match up? And again, people well educated in the Torah and the old law, but they haven't yet heard the good news, essentially. Or it's just come to them. And some of them it hasn't yet, but we know that
Correct.
it hasn't been made to the whole world yet, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a chart for anybody who wants to take a picture of it where we're showing how John, the first chapter in that creation story, shows up in Genesis 1 and Genesis creation story 2, if you want to show that. And then I got another chart that shows how, actually, we're not gonna be looking at that one yet. Yeah, we'll show that next week. But this is cool. This is really cool stuff. You know, how pretty clearly John is restating the creation story, but showing where Jesus, the Word, was showing up in that creation story that's not mentioned in Genesis, right? And saying, hey, everybody, Jesus. Jesus. If it is, Jesus. If it even exists, Jesus. Blasphemy. Or not. Right? In truth, not. Because he was telling the truth about himself. That's the dilemma that we find ourselves when we wrestle with this whole idea. They wanted to stone him for calling himself God, equating himself to God, correct? They wanted to stone him. Not the leaders. The crowd.
The public, yeah.
The public crowd that was listening to him telling them who they were and who he was. And he equated himself to God, picking up rocks. No, you just went too far. So why wasn't he just stoned to death? We're not going to unpack this question. It's a question as we move along. Why was he never stoned to death, which is the prescription in the Torah for blasphemy? Just we're going to toss that out there, and we're going to keep that question in our mind as we walk along through the Gospel of John, right? Because it's a big thing too. It's actually a big thing. Just a little spoiler, Pilate couldn't give a rip about the Torah. Right? Pilate did not care about the Torah or the Jewish nation or anything about it. Anyhow, good? Let's go ahead and stop there. Let's go ahead and stand and pray together. Thank you guys so much for being here with me and contributing. Good contributions, good comments. I really appreciate that, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm really looking for that. I want us to really collectively clarify what it is we're actually consuming or ruminating on and studying stuff. So it helps us understand what it is that we are. Right? Father, thanks for your word. Thanks for the even referring to Jesus as the Word. It's very, very deep and profound that this identity, this personality that is a part of you goes by the Word. And how you manifest yourself through Jesus as he comes along at the right time and right place and appointed by you for it all to happen. We ask you to bless us through your Holy Spirit as we study and listen to what you have to say in this gospel, that we'd understand it even better than we have in the past, all of us, and that we can help each other learn from each other's experiences and studies too, Father, in Jesus' name.